Stop scrolling. Seriously, give me 30 seconds because I am about to break your entire understanding of who you are. If I asked you to picture the history of the Philippines, you'd probably think of Asia, rice fields, and maybe 300 years of Spanish friars telling everyone what to do. We've been told the same story for decades. 333 years in a convent, 50 years in Hollywood. But what if I told you that was a lie? Or at least a massive cover-up? What if I told you that when you talk to your mom, when you go to the market, or when you eat your breakfast, you aren't speaking Tagalog, and you definitely aren't speaking Spanish. You are speaking the language of the Aztec Empire. And it gets weirder. What if I told you that Mexico's national drink, tequila, might not exist without Filipino pirates? That there are people living in the mountains of Mexico right now with the last name Maganda? Today, we are tearing down the history books to uncover the Mexican connection. Buckle up, hit that subscribe button, because you're going to realize you've been Mexican this whole time. Alright, let's start with language. It's the code we run on. We use Spanish loanwords every day. Mesa, silla, cuchara. We assume it's because of Spain, but here's the reality check. For 250 years, the Philippines wasn't ruled from Madrid. It was ruled from Mexico City. The soldiers and priests didn't come from Europe. They came from Acapulco, speaking a version of Spanish that was already mixed with Aztec Nahuatl. So let's play a game. I call this the You're Not Speaking Tagalog Challenge. Imagine you're at the Palenque. You grab some kamatis, sayote, siyi, and sincamas. You haggle at the Tiangge. Every single noun I just used, not Spanish, not Tagalog. Those are straight-up Aztec words that crossed the Pacific Ocean on wooden boats 400 years ago. Here is the science behind it. The Aztecs had a specific sound at the end of their words. Tel, tomatl, chayotle. The Spanish couldn't pronounce that TL, so they changed it to TE. Chayotle became chayote. Filipinos took it and softened it further. Chayote became sayote. It's a linguistic fossil. Every time you say camote, you are literally invoking the agriculture of Montezuma. Even chocolate comes from chocolatl, meaning bitter water. But the real kicker is Tiangge. You know, the flea market? That is 100% Nahuatl. It comes from Tianquizli, the Aztec word for their grand open-air markets. Basically, our entire concept of buying and selling cheap stuff is Aztec. And now for the controversy. What do you call your parents? If you say Nanay and Tatay, sit down. In original Austronesian languages, the words are ina and ama. You hear this in Malay, Indonesian, and formal Tagalog. So where on earth did Nanay and Tatay come from? Let's look at the Aztec dictionary. Mother is Nantli. Father is Tatli. Drop the TL, you get Nana and Tata. Add the Tagalog affectionate suffix I, and you get Nanay and Tatay. The theory: Mexican soldiers, guachinangos, were marrying Filipino women. Their kids grew up calling dad Tata because that's what dad called his dad back in Mexico. It's not just baby talk, it's evidence of mixed families. Before we get to the ships that made this happen, tell me below, do you call your parents Nanay and Tatay? And did you have any clue you were speaking Aztec? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so we have the words, but how did they get here? They floated on the most dangerous commute in human history, the Manila Acapulco Galleon Trade. For 250 years, this was the cord of silk and silver. But the return trip from Manila to Acapulco was a nightmare. It took 6 months against the wind. People died like flies. Scurvy was the big killer. Your gums would rot, your teeth would fall out, and old wounds would open up. It was normal for a ship to arrive in Acapulco with 50% of the crew dead. They would dump bodies overboard every morning. If you survived the trip, you were rich. If you didn't, you were shark bait. But there is one story that haunts this trade, the story of the San Jose. In 1657, it left Manila and vanished. A year later, fishermen off Mexico saw it drifting. They climbed aboard. Silence. Every single person was dead. They had died of thirst and starvation, drifting across the entire Pacific, carrying a cargo of corpses. But ships carry living people too. When Spain conquered the Philippines, they brought Tlaxcalans, or indigenous Mexican warriors. These soldiers settled in Cavite and Ermita. They were called Guachinangos, named for a red fish in Mexico, maybe because of their red uniforms or sunburnt skin. They lived here, married locals, and their culture bled into ours. And it went the other way. Filipino sailors called Indios Chinos jumped ship in Mexico to escape the return trip. They settled in Guerrero. Here is a fact that will blow your mind. There are families in Mexico today with the last name Maganda. You don't get the last name Beautiful in Tagalog unless your ancestor was a Filipino sailor missing his wife. And look at the fashion, the Barong Tagalog versus the Mexican Guayabera. Historians are pretty sure the Guayabera is just a remix of the Barong. Filipino sailors wore their untucked piña shirts in Mexico. The locals loved it for the heat, added pockets, legend says, to carry guavas, and boom, a Latin American icon was born. And let's talk about fruit. If you've ever eaten an ataulfo or honey mango in the US, that is a Filipino mango. Genetic testing confirms it is descended from the Philippine Carabao mango. The seeds traveled on the galleons. In Veracruz, they literally call it the Manila mango. Even the fruit salad is a result of this trade. Now for the climax, the viral twist. Tequila. It's the national spirit of Mexico. But here is the problem. The Aztecs didn't know how to distill. They fermented agave into pulque, a milky drink. They didn't have the technology to make hard liquor. So, who taught Mexico how to distill? The Filipinos. Filipino sailors in Colima made lambanog, coconut vodka, using a specific still made of hollow tree trunks. It was a hit, but the Spanish banned it to protect their brandy sales. So the Filipinos and Mexicans improvised. They took the Filipino still, moved inland, and applied the technology to the agave plant. That improvisation created mezcal and tequila. Even today, in rural Mexico, the tool used to make mezcal is called a Filipino still. Think about that. The national symbol of Mexico is a child of Filipino engineering and Mexican agriculture, born out of resistance against Spanish taxes. We shared drinks and we shared revolutions. Meet Epigmenio Gonzalez, a hero of Mexican independence. The Spanish arrested him and exiled him to the worst place they could think of, a prison in Manila. He spent 20 years rotting in the Philippines, dreaming of a free Mexico. His suffering proves our struggles were linked. And finally, the most surprising connection, the United States. In the swamps of Louisiana, Filipino sailors established a settlement called St. Malo in the 1700s. When the British attacked New Orleans in 1815, the pirate Jean Lafitte recruited these Manila men to man the cannons. Filipinos were fighting for American freedom decades before the Philippines was even an American colony. We end our story with a woman who traveled more than any of us, the Virgin of Antipolo, the most famous icon in the Philippines. She isn't Filipino, she was carved in Acapulco. She crossed the Pacific 6 times, protecting sailors from storms. She is a Mexican immigrant who became the spiritual mother of the Philippines. We tend to think of history as East versus West, but the Philippines and Mexico are siblings raised in the same abusive colonial household. We shared secrets, food, and blood. So next time you say Tatay or take a shot of tequila, remember, you are part of a 400-year-old secret family spanning the Pacific. If you learned something new today, especially about the tequila, hit that like button. Be honest, did the tequila fact blow your mind? Drop a mango emoji if you made it this far. Check the description for the deep dive sources.